Healthy relationships generally don't develop overnight. Research shows that most relationships evolve in stages over a period of time. In this video, we're going to look at different perspectives on how relationships are developed and how they're maintained. The two main ones are Knapp's stages of relationship development and the dialectical tensions model of relationships. The first model of relationship stages we'll look at is a developmental model developed by researcher Mark Knapp. Knapp's model is centered around romantic relationships. However, there are some parallels to all relationships in his model. In his model, Knapp describes 10 stages of the development of a relationship, and they can broadly be described as coming together and coming apart. We will first talk about the coming together stages of a relationship. The first stage in relationship development is the initiating stage. This occurs when people meet and interact for the first time. It involves making eye contact and making small conversation like, "What's your name and where are you from?" The purpose of these conversations and the content of them is really superficial and meaningless. But basically, the underlying meta communication is to say, "I'm a friendly person and I'd like to get to know you." The initiating phase occurs in all relationships, romantic, friendships, and even business relationships. We all have to spend a period of time where we start to get to know each other. In romantic relationships, initiating can feel very intimidating because it can lead to rejection. That's why studies find that many dating people prefer to initiate in the online or text environment, where the rejection is not quite as large. The next phase is the experimenting stage, and this is when you begin talking about things you might find interesting, like what kind of music somebody likes, what do they do for fun, what do they do outside of school. In this stage, you try to decide if you have enough in common with someone else to continue wanting to get to know each other. The key characteristic of this stage is small talk. We talk about any number of topics and ask questions. We're kind of auditioning each other to see if we'd like to take the relationship to the next level. Studies show that experimenting goes quicker in online and text-type relationships than it does in face-to-face relationships. Additionally, social networks have really changed the nature of experimenting because you can become someone's friend, and once you are their friend, you can peruse their site openly and find out all that information that before you would have to ask to get. The intensifying stage is when people go from being acquaintances to friends. They spend more time together, they meet each other's friends, co-workers, or relatives. They share more intimate information such as their fears, future goals, and secrets. They also express and increase their commitment to each other by saying statements like, "You're important to me," or "I really like you." One of the keys of this stage is expressing feelings. 1/4 of the time, or 25% of the time, this is done directly in this stage. But the rest of it is less direct through favors, tokens of affection, hinting, and flirting. The intensifying stage is the emotional stage of a relationship. It's when you have excitement to see each other and euphoria. You have those goosebumps and those romantic gazes. The next and fourth stage is the integrating stage, and this is when a deep commitment is formed. People have a strong sense the relationship has its own identity. The partners' lives become integrated with each other, and they begin to think of themselves as a pair or a we, not just a you or I. In an online setting, this might mean when you become FBO or Facebook official in your relationship. One study looked at how men versus women in heterosexual relationships viewed being Facebook official. The studies show that women find being Facebook official as being more intense and more in commitment, and including more rights and restrictions than men did. The fifth and the final stage in the coming together portion of the model is the bonding stage. And this is when partners or relationships go public. It might involve moving in together, getting engaged, having a commitment ceremony, those types of things that show a public expression that they're together and they seek the support and approval of those in their social networks. The final 5 stages of Knapp's model are the coming apart stages, and they basically represent how a relationship comes apart or dissolves. In the differentiating stage of coming apart, individuals begin to see their differences from one another not as desirable or complementary, but rather as undesirable or annoying. This is when people begin to assert more of their me and I want in the relationship. They need to be an individual while also being in a relationship. The key to successfully differentiating in a relationship, which is part of any relationship, is to maintain the commitment while also giving each other your space. The differentiating stage leads to the circumscribing stage. And this is when partners begin to decrease the quality and the quantity of their communication with one another. They spend less time together in order to avoid conflicts. And whenever they are together, they don't really talk about problems, disagreements, or sensitive issues in their relationship. Instead, they stay to safe topics and issues. The circumscribing stage can lead to more and more separation. So it's my friends versus your friends. It's my room versus your room. My bank account versus your bank account. It's not that these can't be overcome, but when there's more separation than integration, the relationship is starting down the dissolution path. If the circumscribing stage progresses to the point where partners are really barely speaking to each other, the relationship enters the stagnating stage, and this is when the relationships stop growing and people feel as if they're just going through the motions. They avoid communicating about anything important because they fear it will lead to conflict. Many relationships stagnate for a long period of time. Next comes the avoiding stage, and this is when you've been in a stagnant relationship for a while and you create physical and emotional distance between you and your partner. Some people take a direct route of actually physically moving to create that distance. Others do it indirectly by coming up with excuses for being apart, such as being out of town or being with other people than the partner. Finally comes the terminating stage, and this is the point in the relationship where it's officially over. It involves one or both partners moving out if they were still together. It involves dividing property, letting friends know the relationship is over, and negotiating the rules for future contact. For legally married partners, it usually means getting a divorce. This is an overall view of Knapp's model. Please note that individual relationships move through these stages at different paces. Some may move very rapidly, and some may move slower. Some may get stuck in certain stages. When it comes to romantic relationships, researchers have found that gay and lesbian pairs follow stages of relationship development that are largely similar to those followed by opposite sex pairs. However, sometimes in gay and lesbian pairs, because there's privacy concerns around their gay or lesbian status, the intensifying and integrating stages can be more difficult to contend with. Also, there can be huge cultural differences in the stages of development. For example, in some places there's arranged marriage where the parents or other relatives become involved in the relationship process. Other countries allow also for the practice of polygamy, which means that you can have more than one spouse at a time. So these stages of development would look very different than Knapp's theory. The biggest criticism of Knapp's model is that it says that a relationship always ends, and it doesn't really address how we maintain and keep long-term relationships. They argue that there are certain maintenance behaviors that we do in order to sustain relationships. In order to maintain relationships, we engage in 5 primary relationship maintenance behaviors. The first of these is positivity. That's acting friendly, being courteous, and refraining from criticism of the other person. The second is openness. This is being willing to discuss and talk with the other person, be open in your relationship, and self-disclose. The third are assurances. This is expressing and stressing your faithfulness and commitment to the relationship. The fourth is social networks, and this doesn't mean Facebook or Twitter. It means making sure that you're doing things with each other's friends, family members, and coworkers. You're each involved in one another's lives. Finally, sharing tasks. You perform your fair share work for one another. This could be actual physical work and helping, or it could just be relational weightlifting. A final criticism of Knapp's model is the idea that relationships don't occur in these types of stages. These researchers believe in a dialectical tension model. You can think of a dialect as kind of a tug of war between two positions. So you want to do both things, and you feel conflicted between the two opposite forces. Dialectical tension are conflicts that occur when two opposing or incompatible forces exist simultaneously. So they would argue that in any relationship, we have some incompatible goals going on. So we want to be part of a couple, but we also want to be free. That's a conflict and incompatible, so it's a dialectic tension. They would also argue that these tensions are going on all the time, not just in particular stages. So whether a relationship is new or old, it has these tensions occurring. Here we are going to talk about 3 of the most significant dialectical tensions that occur in most relationships. The first is autonomy versus connection. We have a desire to be our own individual and our own person, but we also have a desire to be connected to others. We can think of this as space that we want in our relationship. And this is one of the most commonly cited issues in relationships, is how close and how much individual freedom each partner should have in the relationship. The second dialectic that's very powerful in relationships is openness and desire for disclosure and honesty, and closedness and desire to keep some information, thoughts, or ideas to yourself. So in any relationship, sometimes you want to confide information and other times you want to hold it back. Openness and privacy can become problematic in relationships when partners have different expectations about what they should know about one another. So some may prefer to hold back information, and some may want to disclose everything. This creates stress in the relationship. The final tension we're going to talk about here is predictability versus novelty. This is a tension over having a stable relationship versus having some excitement in the relationship. Researchers who believe in dialectical tensions model of relationships stress that tensions are normal and that they only become problematic when we fail to manage them constructively. When it comes to managing dialectical tensions, there's 3 strategies that have been shown to be most effective in relationships. The first is integration. You could call this the meet in the middle approach, where you try to do a little of both things. So a little bit of freedom, and a little bit of closeness. A great example would be, if you're getting stale in a relationship, is to make sure you have a date night once a week. That'd be an example of trying to create some more novelty versus predictability into the relationship. The second strategy that's been very effective is recalibration. Many couples view their dialectical tensions as a problem versus something normal in the relationship. By recognizing that these differences are healthy and good, they're able to think differently about these tensions in their relationship. The final strategy is reaffirmation. Some couples try to fix these tensions. And in reaffirmation, instead of trying to make those tensions disappear, they recognize that they'll always be there and never go away. In another lecture, we'll talk more about messages and strategies for handling relationships. But for now, you've got a perspective on how relationships develop and maintain. Remember, when we think of relationships in these stages, we often focus on romantic relationships. These theories and ideas can apply to almost any relationship. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you in the next lecture.